When you picture the absolute beginning of the world, the story most of us are completely familiar with usually looks like a very specific, classical painting.
Oh, yeah, like a Sunday school felt board, right?
Exactly. You've got Adam, you've got Eve, there's this lush botanical garden, very appealing piece of fruit, and a talking snake.
It is an incredibly famous image. I mean, that specific painting is practically woven into our...
Right. But if we step back and just look at that image objectively, it sounds a bit like a strange fairy tale, like something straight out of Aesop's fables. But there is a massive, glaring clue right there in the ancient text that we almost always miss. And honestly, it changes everything about that classical painting.
It really does. It completely reframes the whole scene.
Think about it. When this snake slithers up and starts having this high-level theological debate with Eve, she doesn't freak out.
No, not at all.
She doesn't look around for Adam and say, why is the garden reptile giving me a lecture? She isn't surprised. There is no shock whatsoever that this creature is communicating with her.
Which implies that what she is looking at and interacting with is not a garden variety reptile. She fully expects this entity to possess language and intelligence.
And that is exactly our mission for today's deep dive. We uncover the true identity of the serpent in Genesis 3. Because, spoiler alert, we are not talking about a snake.
No, we really aren't. What is genuinely fascinating here is that when we analyze the original Hebrew and place it in its ancient Near Eastern context, and then track these clues all the way to the book of Revelation, we discover a completely different profile.
Right, a totally different character.
Yeah, we are not looking at an ordinary animal. We are looking at a radiant, divine being running a calculated disinformation campaign from inside God's own sanctuary.
Okay, I know people listening right now are probably thinking, wait, my English translation literally just says serpent. So to figure out what Eve was actually looking at, we have to start with a specific word the ancient author chose to write down.
And that brings us to the Hebrew word Nachash. It is spelled with 3 consonants, N-H-S. Now, in English, we translate it as serpent, which is fair because that is one of its direct meanings as a noun.
But Hebrew is a language built on root consonants, right?
Yeah.
And depending on how those consonants are used, they carry overlapping associations.
Exactly. It's a very dynamic language. The root NHS actually carries 3 distinct overlapping meanings. First, as a noun, a serpent or snake.
Gotcha.
Second, as a verb, it means to perform divination, to give omens, or to communicate hidden knowledge from the divine realm.
Wait, really? Like magic or sorcery?
Yeah, essentially. For example, in Deuteronomy 18, when Israel is strictly forbidden from practicing divination or seeking hidden spiritual knowledge, this is the exact root word used.
Okay, so it's a serpent and a communicator of hidden divine knowledge.
Right. And then there's a third meaning. It is heavily associated with polished bronze or shiny, gleaming metal.
Like it's physically shining.
Yes. In 1 Chronicles 4, it is used to describe a city of bronze, a place known for metalwork. In the ancient world, polished bronze was intensely radiant. It reflected the sun. And in Daniel chapter 10, when the prophet describes a terrifying, heavenly, divine being, he says its arms and legs look like gleaming bronze. It is that same linguistic root.
Oh, wow. I have an analogy for this. It is like a linguistic optical illusion.
Ooh, I like that. How so?
Well, when we read it in English, we just see serpent. It's like looking at a flat, two-dimensional drawing of a snake on a piece of paper. But an ancient Israelite reader, hearing the word Nachash, would see a 3D hologram.
Yes, that's exactly how it works.
They would simultaneously picture a serpentine form, a radiant or shining appearance, and a being that possesses divine hidden knowledge all at once.
That captures it perfectly. They wouldn't pick just one meaning from a multiple choice list. They would hear all 3 concepts blending together simultaneously.
But let me push back on this for a second, just to play devil's advocate. Languages have weird quirks all the time, right? Like in English, the word bark means the outside of a tree and the sound a dog makes.
Sure.
Are we absolutely sure the ancient author didn't just pick a generic word for a reptile that happened to have some weird secondary meanings? Like, how do we know they chose a word to specifically carry all 3 of those meanings at once?
Because there are other words in biblical Hebrew they could have easily used if they just wanted to describe a literal snake crawling in the dirt. Words like tannin or zihelem.
Oh, so they had options.
Exactly. But the author specifically selected Nachash because they were building a profile. Think about it. Serpentine appearance, radiant presence, access to divine knowledge. When you combine those 3 traits in ancient Near Eastern literature, you're describing a member of the heavenly realm. A divine being.
Which raises a massive logical question for anyone listening. If the Nachash is this radiant divine being from the heavenly realm, what is it doing hanging out in a botanical garden on Earth?
Right, it seems out of place. To understand that, we have to rethink what Eden actually was to the ancient mind. Eden wasn't just a pleasant park with fruit trees and nice landscaping.
It wasn't just a backyard.
No, it was the original sacred space. It was the cosmic mountain where heaven and earth overlapped. It was the dwelling place of God with humanity.
So it was a sanctuary, like a temple.
Exactly. And the vocabulary the biblical text uses for Eden heavily overlaps with how it later describes the tabernacle and the temple.
Oh, right. The sources touched on this. Ancient Israelite readers were supposed to recognize this architectural blueprint immediately, right?
Yes. For instance, the entrance to the portable tabernacle always faces east, just like the eastern gate of Eden where God placed the cherubim to guard the way.
The menorah in the tabernacle fits this perfectly, too. The golden lampstand has 7 branches, and it's deliberately designed with almond blossoms. It is meant to look like an actual tree in full bloom, representing the tree of life.
Spot on. And the curtains of the tabernacle literally have cherubim woven into the fabric because cherubim belong in Eden. The temple is essentially Eden built out of stone.
And furthermore, in ancient Near Eastern thought, wherever a deity dwelt, they were surrounded by their divine council, right?
Yes, this was essentially a heavenly staff or a board of directors made up of lesser divine beings who served the ultimate creator.
Okay, so if Eden is the original temple, the sanctuary of God, and God's divine staff is present, then the Nachash didn't just wander in off the street. It was supposed to be there.
Right. It appears legitimately inside God's sacred space.
This wasn't some external attack by a monster that broke down the walls of the garden. This is corporate treason.
That's a great way to put it.
This divine being was in the room, part of the trusted inner circle, and it launched an audacious disinformation campaign right there in the homeowner's living room.
And that transitions us directly into the mechanics of how this being operates. Because it does not use physical force to overthrow humanity. It uses what we could call weaponized theology.
And if you're listening right now and wondering why we are digging so deeply into the grammar of this conversation, stick with us. Because this translates directly into the psychology of how deception works in our modern world.
It really does. Since this being is on the inside, it already knows exactly what God commanded. The Nachash knows the framework perfectly, but it deliberately twists the perception of that framework.
Let's look at the actual text on that. Back in Genesis 2, God gave humanity a framework of incredible liberty. He says, "You may surely eat of every tree of the garden." And then he sets just one single boundary for their protection. One tree they cannot eat from.
Right. The environment is characterized by total abundance. Everything is yours. Just avoid this one thing.
But listen carefully to how the serpent shifts the emphasis when he talks to Eve. He says, "Did God actually say you shall not eat of any tree in the garden?"
It is so manipulative. He takes God's framework of liberty and completely flips it into a framework of restrict cultural DNA, regardless of your background or where you grew up.
By exaggerating the rule, the serpent forces Eve to defend God. But the framing has already shifted the focus away from the abundance and entirely onto the restriction.
Exactly. If he had started by saying, "Hey, Eve, reject God and worship me," she would have shut the conversation down immediately.
Oh, 100%.
Instead, he just takes a question mark and drops it right where God put a clear, protective period. He subtly makes God's goodness look warped. He makes obedience look unreasonable.
And once that seed of suspicion is planted, he moves in for the kill. After Eve clarifies the rule, the serpent outright denies the consequence, saying, "You will not surely die."
But then he does something even more insidious. He claims to have the inside scoop on God's hidden motives.
Right. He says, "For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like Elohim, knowing good and evil."
Now, Elohim is the Hebrew word for God, but it is also used for divine beings in the spiritual realm. He is stepping in as a false source of revelation.
He's whispering, "I know what the Creator is keeping from you, and I can give you the secret." He is offering her a shortcut to become elevated without having to actually trust the Creator.
Exactly.
But wait, I have to stop you here. Because if this Nachash was a divine being, part of this heavenly council, living in God's presence, why is it suddenly rebelling? Like, why decide to deceive humanity in the first place? What's the motive?
Well, to uncover the motive, our sources point us to a cosmic backstory hidden in the poetic writings of the prophets, specifically Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14.
Okay, I want to push back pretty hard on this right out of the gate.
Go for it.
Aren't those chapters in Ezekiel and Isaiah explicitly addressed to human kings? Like the political king of Tyre and the king of Babylon?
They are, yes.
So if Ezekiel is writing a political critique of an arrogant human ruler, why on earth would we drag a shiny garden snake into it? Aren't we just ripping these texts out of their historical context?
That is a very common and completely valid objection. You are absolutely right that formally the prophets are addressing arrogant human tyrants, but we have to understand the literary device the prophets are employing here.
What kind of device?
They are describing these political kings using an older cosmic backdrop.
Oh, so they are mapping ancient history onto current events.
Yes, precisely. In Ezekiel 28, the prophet describes a figure who was in Eden, the garden of God, a being covered in precious stones who was an anointed guardian cherub placed on the holy mountain of God.
Okay, so clearly not a human king.
Right. This being was blameless from the day it was created until pride and corruption took root because of its immense beauty and splendor, so God casts it out. No literal human king of Tyre was ever an anointed guardian cherub in Eden.
So Ezekiel's looking at the human king's pride and saying, you are acting exactly like that divine being who became obsessed with his own reflection and fell in the garden.
Exactly. And the ancient audience would have immediately recognized the reference, without a doubt.
Okay, that makes sense. And Isaiah 14.
Isaiah 14 uses the exact same technique with the king of Babylon. It describes a figure called the Shining One, son of the dawn. In the ancient Near East, that was a reference to Venus, the morning star, which rises brightly in the sky, but is then completely overshadowed by the sun.
Wow. Okay.
The text says this Shining One tried to ascend above the stars of God to set his own throne on the mountain of the assembly, but was cast down to the underworld.
Hold on. The Shining One. That links right back to the third meaning of Nachash, the radiant, gleaming bronze.
It connects perfectly. And there is one more critical piece to this puzzle. In Isaiah 6, the prophet sees a vision of God's throne room, and the throne is surrounded by guardian beings called seraphim.
Yeah, I've always heard seraphim translated simply as angels or burning ones.
They are burning ones, derived from a Hebrew verb meaning to burn. But seraph is also a literal Hebrew noun for serpent.
A serpentine throne guardian.
Yes. In ancient Near Eastern iconography, a serpentine divine being guarding the presence of a deity was a highly recognizable category. It was their cultural equivalent of a cherub.
So when you synthesize the clues in Genesis 3, Ezekiel 28, Isaiah 14, and Isaiah 6, you get a remarkably consistent, terrifying picture. The Nachash is a radiant serpentine throne guardian.
An anointed cherub whose literal assigned job was to protect sacred space.
But he became consumed with his own splendor, tried to usurp the ultimate authority, and was cast down. Which means the story we are reading in Genesis 3, the fall of humanity, is actually the spillover damage of a prior rebellion in the divine realm.
Exactly. The human tragedy happens in the shadow of a cosmic war that had already broken out.
That is wild. This realization completely rewires how I read God's response to the deception. Because after the humans eat the fruit, God steps into the garden and starts handing out judgments. And not all humans have a biological hatred of snakes. Like, some people keep them in terrariums in their bedrooms.
Very true.
So if this is just an etiology, like, a story explaining why a garden animal crawls on the ground, the curse doesn't really hold up to reality.
But if you understand the Nachash as a defeated divine being, the judgment is profound. This isn't about a change in diet. It is about a total, humiliating loss of status.
How so?
In the ancient world, eating dust is a well-known idiom for the condition of the defeated, and specifically, the condition of the dead.
Oh, I see. It is about being cast down from the highest mountain to the lowest possible place.
Yes. The Hebrew word used for earth or dust here is aretz. While it can mean the physical ground, it is also used extensively in the Old Testament to mean the underworld or the domain of the dead.
Really? Like where?
For example, the prophet Jonah uses it when he's talking about sinking into the watery pit. The most radiant, exalted being in God's heavenly council is being humiliated and sentenced to the realm of death.
Wow. He tried to ascend to the highest place, and the Creator sentences him to the absolute lowest.
Exactly. But God doesn't stop there. He doesn't just demote the Nachash, he issues a formal declaration of war.
Okay, this brings us to one of the most pivotal moments in the entire text. Genesis 3.15. Theologians often call it the proto-evangelium, which translates to the first gospel, or the first good news.
It is the ultimate promise. God turns to the serpent and says, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring." or translated literally, between your seed and her seed.
And then it says, he shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. It is a prophetic guarantee that one day, a specific human, the seed of the woman, is going to step onto the battlefield.
And it won't be easy.
Right. The serpent is going to wound him, striking his heel, but this human is going to inflict a lethal blow. He's going to crush the serpent's head.
And what is truly amazing is that from this specific verse onward, the rest of the biblical narrative acts as a giant tracking device for this promised seed.
Oh, like all those genealogies.
Yes. Ancient audiences cared deeply about genealogies, those long lists of begats that modern readers often skip over. They didn't read them as boring census data. They read them as high-stakes tracking.
Because the battle lines are drawn right here in chapter 3, and the whole subsequent narrative is frantically tracing this bloodline. Like right after this curse, Eve gives birth to Cain. And based on what she names him, she clearly thinks, this is it. I got the guy. He's going to crush the serpent.
But Cain turns out to be a murderer.
Yeah, quite the opposite.
So the tracking device moves to Seth. Then it traces down through the generations to Noah. Following the flood, it narrows to Abraham, where God specifically promises that through his seed, all nations of the earth will be blessed.
The focus just keeps narrowing down generation after generation.
Exactly. It tracks through the patriarchs to King David, where God promises his seed will sit on the throne forever. Until we reach the New Testament, where the Apostle Paul explicitly points out the culmination of this tracking in Galatians 3.1c.
What does Paul say there?
He argues that the ancient promise wasn't made to seeds, plural, referring to a whole nation, but to a single specific offspring, Jesus Christ.
Okay, and if we are discussing Jesus, we have to unpack this bizarre twist in the book of Numbers that our sources brought up, because honestly, this blew my mind when I realized the connection.
Oh, you mean the incident in Numbers 21?
Yes. The Israelites are wandering in the wilderness, they are complaining bitterly about their conditions, and God sends a judgment in the form of fiery serpents that bite the people.
And do you remember the literal Hebrew word used there?
It's seraphim, right?
Yes, the burning ones, the very same word used for the serpentine throne guardians.
Okay, so people are dying from the venom, so Moses intercedes. God tells Moses to build a bronze Nachash, a shining bronze serpent, and put it up on a wooden pole. God promises that anyone who looks at this bronze serpent will be healed. My question has always been, why use the symbol of the enemy? Why use the emblem of deception and death to bring healing?
To understand this, we have to look at how ancient cultures viewed healing and sympathetic magic. There was a medical and spiritual concept of, cures like, similar to how we conceptualize antivenom today.
So you take a bit of the poison to cure the poison.
Essentially, yes. You take a small dose of the very thing that is killing you, and you use it to create the cure. In Eden, the Nachash was the source of corruption and spiritual death. But Jesus himself reveals the ultimate, deeper meaning of this bronze serpent in the Gospel of John, chapter 3.
What does he say?
He says, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up.
Oh, wow. That is profound.
Jesus takes the very symbol of humanity's downfall, the emblem of the enemy's venom, and by taking the curse upon himself on the cross, he acts as the ultimate anti-venom.
He absorbs the poison of the rebellion.
The curse is exhausted and broken.
He transforms the image of death into the mechanism that saves. And this entire massive arc, this tracking of the serpent and the seed from the dawn of humanity, it finally culminates in the book of Revelation.
Yes. Revelation 12.9 completely removes any lingering ambiguity for the reader. John writes about a great dragon being thrown down, and he explicitly calls it that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world.
The ancient serpent. He reaches all the way back across thousands of years to Genesis 3.
And when you reach the very end of the text, in Revelation 22, what is the final image? A restored city that looks architecturally and spiritually exactly like Eden.
Right. The river of life is flowing, the tree of life is accessible, and humanity is dwelling once again in the immediate presence of God. But there is one crucial difference from the original garden.
What's that?
The Nachash is gone. The serpent is nowhere to be found.
Exactly. The sacred space has been permanently reclaimed. The cosmic war is over.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? I mean, the biggest takeaway here is that Genesis 3 isn't just a quaint fairy tale invented to explain why we don't like snakes.
Definitely not.
It is the blueprint for the very real psychological and spiritual warfare that we are walking through every single day. The serpent's method, the twisting of framework, and the disinformation campaign has not changed in thousands of years.
The tactics remain identical.
he still takes the boundaries that were meant for our protection and flourishing, and he whispers that they are actually oppressive. He thrives on planting a seed of suspicion, making us doubt the goodwill of the framework around us.
It's all about making us doubt the creator's intentions.
Right. And honestly, every time we bend the truth just a little bit to justify our own selfish desires, we are listening to that same old hiss from the garden.
That is so true. And this raises an important point, and it is something I want to leave you with to mull over long after this deep dive is done.
Let's hear it.
If the prophets Ezekiel and Isaiah are right, and this ancient serpent was originally an anointed guardian cherub, that his specific divine vocation was to protect sacred space. He was entrusted with guarding God's presence, and by extension, guarding humanity.
He was supposed to be the ultimate protector.
Right. So consider what it says about the truly insidious, corrosive nature of pride. That the very entity tasked by the Creator with guarding humanity from evil became the one who deliberately introduced it to them.
Man, that is a chilling thought. We started out today looking at a flat, almost comforting painting of a garden with a normal, recognizable snake. But suddenly, we are staring at a multidimensional reality of divine rebellion and high-stakes deception.
It really changes everything.
The landscape of the ancient text isn't murky anymore. The depth of the story is terrifyingly, beautifully clear. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you on the next one.